Today we're gonna talk about music once again, and I actually wanted to make a my favorite death metal albums video, and I started writing the albums together and I realized, wait, actually I don't even really listen to death metal that much, so I realized that I have a lot of catching up to do, but there's one subgenre of metal where I am a veteran, and that is black metal, and because of that today I'm gonna talk about my favorite black metal albums ever. I have 19 albums, and it's actually not even 19, it's even more than that. So one change that I'm making in this video is I'm only going to say one favorite song from each album, and there are also a couple of albums here that I talked about in previous videos, so I am not going to talk about them as much. There is not gonna be a particular order, but the first album that we're gonna be starting with is Algleymi by Majorem, and this album is my absolute favorite black metal album at the moment, and my favorite song from this album is Algleymi. And I'm not going to talk anymore about this album because I already talked about it in my favorite albums videos. So I'm going to talk about the other Majorem album that I deem really good, which is Söngvar, elds, óreiðu. This one is the first album from Majorem, and Algleymi is the second, and they also have a third album, but that album in my opinion doesn't even come close to these two. And Söngvar, elds, óreiðu is much more brutal. How I would explain the two albums is the first one is a lot more brutal, a lot more merciless, while the second one is a lot more, I'd say, despairful, but also very crushing where it needs to. And I actually did see Majorem recently live, and they were fucking amazing. And my favorite song from this album is Vikingligr Veldi. The third album on the list is from Dissection, and it's called Storm of the Light's Bane, and since I talked about this album in my favorite albums video, I am not going to talk about it very much here. It's a very good melodic black metal album. I think most people probably know it. If you don't know it, go and check it out. And my favorite song from the album is Where Dead Angels Lie. The fourth album is gonna be from Darkthrone, and now you might be curious, okay, which is your favorite Darkthrone album? It is Panzerfaust. Now it's actually kind of funny because this is the least black metal album from Darkthrone, I would say, but it is still black metal, and from all of their black metal albums this is my personal favorite. I would say the most black metal album that they have is Under a Funeral Moon, which is just 100% pure fucking black metal, but Panzerfaust isn't, and that's exactly why I like it that much, because I think personally for Darkthrone what really works is not necessarily the 100% full-on black metal. And I think you can perfectly hear the pure Darkthrone essence in this album, but also the pure Darkthrone black metal side as well. And my favorite song from the album is Quintessence. The fifth album is Emperor in the Nightside Eclipse. Probably my favorite album from the OG classic Norwegian black metal albums. If you don't know Emperor, I don't even fucking know what you're doing watching this video, but Emperor is an OG Norwegian, very classic second wave black metal band, and they were one of the first to experiment with blending a more symphonic vibe into black metal and also clean vocals, and you can hear all of that on this album. And my favorite track is Inno a Sathanas. The sixth album is Enslaved Vikingligr Veldi, and I actually talked about this album in my favorite albums video, but I also talked about Frost, and the reason why I'm not putting Frost here but I'm putting this one is because this is a lot more true black metal, whereas Frost, I would say, has more of a Viking metal essence. In this album they're still very, very cold and raw, but they already start experimenting with the Viking metal elements as well. And I think that makes a perfect blend. Now, there are 4 songs in the album, and there isn't really one that stands out because all of them are very good, so I cannot pick a favorite from them. So I'm just gonna say all of them. The 7th album is Marduk Opus Nocturne. I talked about this album before. I think this is the black metal masterpiece of Marduk. It's absolutely crushing, a little bit dry sounding, which also adds to the atmosphere, and very good drums. My favorite song is from Subterranean Throne Profound. The 8th album is going to be 2 albums because it's gonna be from Búrtum, and I couldn't really choose one album, so I decided that I would put both. Also because these 2 albums are actually very different. The first album is Hvis, lyset, and the second one is Filosofem. I personally think that the first one has a much more of a kind of vibe and build where you would listen to the whole thing at once as like an entire story. And my favorite song from that is Det som en gang var. But Filosofem, on the other hand, is, I think it just has really strong banger individual songs, but it's also a very good album as a whole. And there is a very fucking long track on it, which is just random synth music, which kind of gives to the experience when you listen to the album as a whole. But the very main reason why I put this album here and why I really absolutely love this album is because of the sound. Because of the crispy guitar sound, because of the drums. This is, in my opinion, probably peak black metal sound. And my favorite song from the album is this fucking German shit that I'm not even going to try to say. The 9th album is Nachthymnen by Abigor, and I talked about this album in another video, so I'm not gonna talk about it that much here. Very interesting, cold as fuck black metal from Austria that doesn't really sound like any other black metal that you can typically hear. And my favorite song is Revealed Secrets of the Whispering Moon. The 10th album is Paracletus by Death Spell Omega. I kind of touched on this album in another video, but I'm going to talk about it here. Death Spell Omega at this point has a lot of hype around it, and if you don't know what they are, it's kind of an avant-garde, very experimental black metal band. And I remember that the first time I heard this album, it reminded me of Mr. but a lot more like, you know, cranking up the experimentalism to 10. Just a lot more absurd, a lot weirder music, and my favorite song from the album is Wings of Predation. The 11th album is Arson by Harakiri for the Sky, and this band is kind of a post-black metal band. It's definitely worth checking them out, especially if you're not that deep into black metal, because I think this is a lot more melodic and catchy black metal. And also it's not really the evil type of black metal, it's more so the sad type of black metal. And my favorite song is Heroin Vault. And I have only one problem with this album, and that is that it gets a little bit boring towards the end. Because after hearing like 4 or 5 songs, you're like, okay, this is kind of just the same shit again and again. But it's still pretty good. The 12th album on the list is Age of Excuse by Majorem. I discovered this album about a year ago and it was instantly favorite worthy. It's just such an interesting but also crushing album at the same time, with very interesting concepts. And all of the songs are legendary on it, and because of that I cannot pick a favorite song. But also, even if I would pick one, you would probably have no fucking idea which one it is because of the way they named their songs. I saw this meme once that I found really hilarious, where it was like, you know, there are people coming up to girls wearing band t-shirts like, name 3 songs, and it's like, Majorem fans. With the 13th album, we're getting into fucking nightmare territory. There is Silencer, Death Pierce Me. I would suggest that you don't listen to this album if you don't have a strong bearing capacity for disturbing music, because at this point I'm pretty desensitized to all of the like weirdness of black metal and all that. But this album still has an effect on me, and it's definitely not good though. But I still really love this album. It's absolutely a terrifying album, one of the most disturbing albums that I know. And I don't know if I am the only one who thinks that. Definitely not. This album is probably the most DSBM album that you can create, that is also somewhat pretty sometimes, but mostly it's really fucking ugly and depressing and cold and scary and just weird. One thing that makes the album a ton better is it doesn't sound like shit, guys. When it comes to black metal, one thing that I really hate is people still try to fucking copy albums that were given out like, what, 30 years ago? And then 30 years ago, people were always recording with like perfect, clean sound quality when it came to death metal, and the black metal people just wanted to rebel against that, and so they were like, okay, let's fucking record this shit with a potato. But people are still doing it to this very day, and at this point it's getting old. It's not 1994 or something. And while I do agree that sometimes it does give to the vibe, most of the times it actually takes away a lot, because the music doesn't become as crushing. As it could be with good audio quality, but this one has excellent quality, and that's also why it becomes a lot more fascinating. And one thing that I do recommend is, if you listen to this album once, like listen to it maybe once and then never fucking listen to it again, because it will make you depressed. My favorite song from the album is Death Pierce Me. But do not sleep on Takla Makan and The Slow Kill in the Cold, because these two songs are, in my opinion, the coldest and most like soulless, absolutely depressing songs on the album. The 14th album is again two albums from Auðn. It's the first and the third album. The first album is Auðn and the third is Vökudraumsins fangi, because again I wasn't able to decide which album to put, so I decided to just put both. Auðn is a pretty brutal Icelandic black metal band, and I would, like, if I would have to compare it to something, it's a little bit like Majorem, but not really. But that's probably the closest thing to it on this list. Although Auðn has a lot more slower and kind of prettier part. And my favorite track from Auðn is Sivreri. And my favorite track from Vökudraumsins fangi is Næðir. The 15th album is Darken Nocturne Slaughtercult with Saldorian Spell. I think this album is absolutely fucking genius, and the reason why I really love this album, and the reason why I also decided to put it here, is because I think this album and just this band in general perfectly represents what black metal should be today. As I said a couple albums before, so many people are still trying to just copy the 30-year-old shit that was cool 30 years ago. And don't get me wrong, there are albums from those times like Transylvania Hunger that are absolute classics, but that doesn't mean we have to do the same thing over and over and over again, because it's not 1994 anymore. And Darken Nocturne Slaughter accepted that and made something that actually fits, in my opinion, the current stage of black metal that we're in, and this album is fucking amazing. It's really crushing, the blast beats are really fast, the riffs are absolutely amazing. It's like, it just blows your mind. And because of the good sound quality, you can actually hear all of that, and it actually crushes your ears instead of just making you want to yourself, because it sounds so terrible and it doesn't have any kick to it or any essence. Like a lot of modern black metal albums that are actually not modern, the only thing that's modern about them is that they weren't given out 30 years ago. But if they would say that they were given out 30 years ago, I would completely believe it. My favorite song from the album is Suur of Death. And the next album is Blóði Og Anda by Solstafir, and I got to see Solstafir live, by the way, recently, and This album is probably not black metal. I have absolutely no fucking clue what genre this album is, but Guru said it's black metal, and so that gives me an excuse to talk about it, so I'm gonna talk about it because it's one of my favorite albums. This is Soulstavir at their rawest and black metal-est, and it doesn't really sound like anything else I've ever heard before, and that's exactly the reason why I love it so much. It sounds so different. It is so different. Everything is so different about it. The drums, the guitars, just in general the kind of riffs that they play. And I really love the vibe of this album, and pretty much every song on it is actually a masterpiece, and my favorite song from it is the Underworld song. The 17th album is again 2 albums by Gorgorov, the first one called Ad Majorem Sathanas Gloriam, and the other one is called Twilight of the Idols. And recently I had a phase where I listened to a lot of Gorgorov, and I listened to these albums a lot, and I realized that I love these bands so much because they have absolutely crushing, unapologetic black metal. There are also a couple of songs that are a little bit more pretty, and there are a couple of songs that are just pure crushing. My favorite song from Twilight of the Idols is Blóði Og Anda. And my favorite from Ad Majorem Sathanas Gloriam is... Why the fuck does everybody have to give these complicated ass names? Carving a Giant. The 18th album is from Shining, and I listened to a lot of Shining, and one thing that I think about Shining is there's not really one album that really stands out in my opinion. It's more like all of their work is really good, but there's really none of it that's like that much over the top. But if I would have to pick something, which I kind of had, I would just honestly go with the one album that everybody goes with, which is Halmstad, because it is probably the most defining work and the most well-organized album. I know that a lot of people call Shining DSBM, and I think they call themselves that as well. Honestly, I wouldn't do that. I don't think they're really DSBM because they don't sound DSBM for most of the time. I get that the lyrics are DSBM themed, but I don't think anybody gives a shit about it, especially because most of them are in Swedish, and the music itself is a lot more angry rather than depressed, and very often it's very crushing and badass sounding, and it's not necessarily always the very fast blast beats that you hear from Shining, even though they do that as well and it works for them as well. But it's not just that, and my favorite song from the album is Neka Morgondagen. That song is absolutely fucking crazy. I listened to that song so many times. It's one of my favorite songs just ever. And with all of that, we move on to the last album of this video, which is actually gonna be DSBM, but also very angry and crushing at the same time. And that is Totalselfhatred by Totalselfhatred. The main feature of this album that I think most other albums don't have is it can be so pretty, and then just seconds later it can be so ugly and angry and crushing and absolutely nasty. They have some riffs in some places where like the whole guitars and the bass together is just so insanely nasty that it's hard to even explain. You have to hear it. And with all of the sadness and hatred that is in this album, you can definitely hear it that they're from Finland. Sorry Finland, I had to. And my favorite song from the album is Ruoska. And with all of that said, I'm done here. Hopefully you found something new that you can listen to now, and click here to watch my next video or last video.